Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are delighted to have you join us in this LinkedIn Live conversation that we have been preparing called Breaking with Conventional Wisdom. My name is JD Schramm. I will be your host, and I am here interviewing my friend and colleague, Chris Lipp. Hi, Chris. How are you today?
Good to meet you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I know a lot of the people who are joining us today are people you know, JD. So I just want to start this off, even though you're running this, is I dedicated this book to JD Schramm. And I know he's not going to mention that, but I wanted to share it with you because I think for everybody who knows JD, you know, in some way, I know you've been touched by him. And he's had a huge impact on my life as well. And so I wanted to share that, and that's why I dedicated the book to him. So we'll be speaking about more.
Well, we're gonna talk a lot about your book. I wasn't going to read the passage on page where am I at? Page 189. But I really liked what you said about me, and it was a surprise. I did not know that when we set this event up. I've been looking forward to sharing Chris's third book with everyone. And as I was doing my prep this week, I was stunned to see my name mentioned in the inside front cover and on the back with acknowledgments. And Chris, what you have written is really a remarkably well-researched, well-written, and well-told business book around the science of persuasion, but it's not what people would expect. And as we set this conversation up, we discussed that we wanted to talk about breaking with convention for people who haven't read it yet, because it's only been out 8 days. How does your book break with convention? How do you fit that title?
It's interesting because I've been seeing other authors speaking here at Tulane University, where I'm working right now, and they keep coming in with kind of the same position, which is, you know, today power and organizations is this community collective thing where we support each other, and it's a beautiful image. I think we all kind of think of power generally. There's almost a social negative vibe to it, right? This idea of alpha power and dominance and stuff. And so there's been this counter trend where power is, you know, connection, and but it's starting to get. I might get in trouble for this, but it's starting to get a little bit too kumbaya for me. And the fact is, actually, there is not this dichotomy of warmth power and dominance power. When you look at power in the psychology, the research in psychology, like these are two different versions of the same power underneath it. And these are just different personality traits that are causing these different behaviors. In some cases, actually, what we mistake for power is actually powerlessness, right? In certain dominant behaviors. But I wanted to find a book that really was something that was a synthesis of the inside and the outside. Something that wasn't like, okay, here's a strategy that's very Machiavellian that I can succeed on the outside, but it makes me feel really terrible on the inside, right? But at the same time, I didn't want to have like a really generic self-help book. It's like, you know, self-love and stuff, which I love, you know, I love this stuff, but I wanted to have some sort of external impact. And, you know, evolution is set up in such a way that it wouldn't make sense if what we feel on the inside that makes us feel good didn't get us success on the outside, that we always had to be in conflict with ourselves to have success one way or the other. And so I just went for the research. Well, what does research say makes us feel empowered and powerful on the inside and confident, but also achieves results on the outside? And that's how the science of personal power came to be.
And we're gonna dive into that balance of internal and external that you get into in your book. But as usual with Chris and JD, we took off at 60 miles an hour, and I'm not sure everybody is on the bus and has their luggage put in the overhead rack and has their seatbelt safely tied in and clicked. So would love to just invite anybody who is with us this afternoon for this conversation. Just drop in the chat where you're dialing in from. Chris already mentioned he's at Tulane University in New Orleans. I am in my home office in San Rafael, California, and we are delighted to have all of you with us for this conversation. Yeah, it's exciting to see where people are where people are dropping in from, and who all has chosen to join us. Chris, this is kind of how I want to frame this. I want to talk a lot about the product. I want to talk about the book and the three triads, the first, second, and third triad of your model. But I also want to talk about the process, like how you got to this being your third book, and kind of how you distinguish that from the first two that you've written, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. We will take those at any point, but we will also specifically take questions near the end. But we wanted to keep this as a dialogue, so I'm also happy to answer your questions about what I thought of your book as I finished it at 3:14 this morning. I told one of my friends this morning, I said, I don't expect business books to be a page turner, but I literally could not go to bed last night. Like I was really engaged with your storytelling and with the direction of it. So you did a little bit of this a moment ago, Chris, but just for people as they are looking at ordering it, looking at reading it, distinguish for us, what do you do in the science of power that's not been done by other authors on power? What is the unique contribution that your book is able to bring into the field on the science of personal power?
It's a great question. And a lot of books on power do focus purely externally, right, on getting results. And those that talk about empowerment and these things, they do actually touch on it, what the science would say is true, but it's not a synthesis of the science. There's quite a big difference. And so I really wanted to understand, well, what are the actual facts that you can take with you, that you can use to empower yourself and to empower others. And I didn't want it to be my opinion. You know, I think that's very fluffy. So there are a lot of autobiographies, for example, on very powerful people and the life they lived that was, fulfilling, but also very achievement oriented and successful. I read these books, I love them, but as you know, these are just people sharing their opinions about what worked for them. And no doubt, a large part of what they're writing about probably is effective and is validated by the science, but also a lot of it is personality. A lot of it is their circumstances. So you can't really tell what do they say? Separate the wheat from the chaff, right? In the autobiographies. So some people have written about how to get over that they interview a lot of leaders, right? And try to get kind of a synthesis of different leadership perspectives, which is phenomenal. I love that approach. Still, that approach suffers ultimately from the same weaknesses. It's not necessarily grounded in science, so you're not sure. And a lot of people, when they do these interviews, they also don't recognize that they have an implicit agenda. Like they're trying to say, hey, actually, I want to show that power can be communicative and whatnot, which is wonderful to kind of break this illusion that power is all alpha power. But at the same time, there's still an agenda there, which means it's missing really what the core is. And so by focusing on the science, I just wanted the truth, and I wanted the truth that worked for everybody.
I can remember several years ago when I brought forward a book at Stanford that talked about the science of team membership, how we show up in teams. And there was a short little test that you did that you got defined in one of these 4 categories of teams. And one of my colleagues at the time, who comes from a much richer science background than I do, was like, yeah, JD, this isn't science. This is, self-reported feelings about what it's like to be on a team in this moment, but don't call it science. And yet, Chris, as I read through your book, it is well cited. It is heavily integrated with the science from a number of different, whether it's Cameron Anderson at Berkeley, yes, or Jeff Pfeffer at Stanford, or other places that you have found scientific experiments that have been done. You really brought all of that in a way that I didn't find intimidating. I actually found drawing. I found it to be engaging me because I wanted to know what the science said. And that's not usually my experience of, like you say, many of these books are one leader's opinion or a collection of 10 or 12 leaders, but you really honor the science in the way you wrote the book, Chris.
So, you and I, JD, we both teach at, I think, competitive business schools. And so we have to really...
I have to correct you. I'm at USC, so I'm at a competitive communication school, but I was at a competitive business school for a long time.
I mean, you're one of the top 5 communication schools in the world you're teaching at. So you know, the results have to be at the highest quality in these situations. What I'd really like, I really want to share with the audience today too, like some of the tips that they can really use to empower themselves. Because the reason, and you asked this, like the reason I wrote this book, JD, and the reason this is my 3rd book is because one of the things that I've always seen, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Like my dad is an entrepreneur, he is an entrepreneur. And, but he had I got to see a lot of failures as well as successes, because anybody who's on a path of any sort of entrepreneurship or not, their failures are part of the process. And it hurts me to watch people who fail because they get held back by other people. Like I can't, particularly in business, when I remember the first time I was on a corporate job, and this thought that my entire career depended on the opinion of the person above me, my boss, was like, I rankled at that. It was, and so, my first foray into, okay, how do we deal with this is persuasion. Naturally, we look at communication, we look at persuasion. I wrote 2 books on persuasion, pitching persuasion. But then here I was teaching persuasion, and I'm like, wow, actually, there are a lot of times that fail. And I will give you an example to give you something hard and concrete right away. Please. One of the things that we learn and in persuasion is to show your credibility, right? The more credible you are, the more you've done, the more people will like you, and the more you'll be taken seriously. But this is actually not always true. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example for people who are interviewing or negotiating or pitching any high stakes situation. If we look at power, the definition of personal power is your belief in your own capability to create impact. Right? Your belief
Say that one more time.
To create impact. So it's an internal belief, but when we have that belief, it's also unconscious or subconscious. So we don't just like program it with affirmation. We actually have to program it in the way we behave. But so it's under our control, but it's something that radiates outward, and people experience it. Our behavior, our language, even our tone of voice changes when we're tapped into a stronger belief in ourselves. Now, what people who are, if you were to differentiate powerful people from powerless people, powerful people, ultimately, if I were to simplify it like into the simplest oversimplification, is that powerful people focus on their own goals. Powerless people focus on being approved of by others. Right? Powerful people focus on their own goals. Powerless people focus on being approved of by others. Well, now we talk about credibility, okay? So now you're basically trying to say, hey, I'm great, so you'll listen to me. But you can see how that immediately could look like you're trying to win approval. So let's say you go into a interview, and have you ever wondered why it's important to ask questions during an interview? Or if you're in a pitch meeting, why do you have to ask questions of the investors? Like, why can't you just show off how great you are? And that it doesn't work, right? You have to ask questions. And part of the reason, they've done some research on this, powerful people, let's say that you're a captain trying to select a player, right? Or you're a boss trying to select somebody to hire, is you're evaluating that person. You're curious about their qualities to determine whether they'll be a good fit for the role, right? So curiosity is what we see interviewers, investors, and these things do in the traditionally powerful position. Curiosity, learning, right? Learning in service to our own goals. Whereas those who are in the less powerful position, the interviewee, the person who's trying to raise funding, the player to a captain is trying to prove that they're good enough. And so proving is a low power behavior. If you walk into an interview or an investor meeting or whatever, and your intent is to prove yourself, and you just come in and you're just throwing your credibility up in order to show that you're great, you actually are diminishing your power. And no matter how much persuasion you use, that power imbalance will completely it disempowers you. It disempowers your words.
Really well said. And you layer that throughout the book in a number of different, very clear ways. You talked earlier, right at the beginning, about the internal and external aspects of power, Chris. I appreciated bringing it down to this phrase, which is a sentence from you in the epilogue. But I think it for me, it captured the whole book in 3 lines. Page 185, you say, our social power is rooted in serving others. Those who secure senior positions in hierarchies are those who provide the most value to the group. The group is merely a collection of individuals. When you serve the individuals in the group, they hold you in esteem. And this is a line I love. Power is not power over others. Power is not a goal. Power is a consequence of providing value.
Yes.
And if I'll let that sink in with our viewers for a moment. If you're in a situation that you're trying to manipulate into how to be visible, how to be seen, how to be liked, none of that is at the root of providing value. And if instead you provide value, then your power will be a consequence of having brought value into the organization, be it at a team level, at an enterprise level, at a global level. And I love that focus, Chris, on providing value being the source of power.
Yes, socially. And it happens very naturally. People who are empowered tend to, anything that furthers their values, for example, they feel empowered pursuing their own values, right? And this is why it's so important to have alignment with organizational values. So, if we take it kind of a step back, there's a lot of talk about having visions and these things, right? It's important for leaders to have visions. Why? Because the purpose of a vision actually allows your employees to connect their values with the organization's values and then thus be empowered in pursuit of the organization's goals. If you don't have a vision, your employees can't empower themselves in the process of working. Well, they can, but different ways, and it's not going to be as strong. And so that's a big part of it right there, right? And you as a leader, you're naturally, you in pursuing this goal is you're empowering the team by having an organizational vision or certain values that people can get behind.
And what it caused me as a reader was to reflect on, and at the end of each chapter, for those of you who when you read it, at the end of each chapter, Chris has some great exercises, reflections, activities that you can take on. But what it did for me as a reader was reflect on, when was I in organizations that I knew I was adding value? And when was I in organizations where my value wasn't evident, or even in one situation I thought of where I was actually taking value away, I wasn't contributing. And that lens, if you will, Chris, was a beautiful way to look at my own exercise and articulation of power and what would be next for me in the next organization or client or project that I serve, be it pro bono or be it compensated. One thing I wish you would have put in the book, in Dan Pink's Drive, at the end of his book, he has a 2-page summary, and then he has a cocktail party summary, and then he has a tweet, which I guess we now call X's, and then he has a 6-word story. So I would have loved like that easy entrance way in for me. But what I did appreciate in the epilogue, and then I went back and I could see it in the table of contents, I could see it through the whole book, was your concept of the 3 triads.
Yes.
And the way I understood them, that the 3 triads of courage, delivering, expressing courage or having courage, delivering value, and self-assertion, that if these 3 elements of courage, value, and self-assertion come together, that then is the source of personal power as indicated by the science. Did I get that right? Did I summarize it correctly, Chris?
It's so apropos too, because in the comments, there's a comment now that is, providing value doesn't always translate into greater power. And that is exactly why there's 3 triads and not 1. So when we look, it's like the comment couldn't have been placed at a better time. So when we think about power, first, if we look at the psychology of power, and that's really chapter 2, it's this triad of ultimately what is the practice of courage. And so it focuses on 3 things. It focuses on your sense of control over the environment, whether you're internally or externally oriented, and then a focus on action. So this is the root psychology of power. And then as a result of that, there are certain expressions that arise from this. And that's the second triad. Or what are the expressions of the mindset of power that serve others, that add value to the team? And then there's a third triad. Now, if power were all about adding value, then people pleasers would rule the world. I say that in the book. If it were all about adding value, people pleasers would rule the world, but they don't. So there's much more to that. And that's the third triad, which is your self-assertion. And one of the great research that you see in this is actually supported in part by Maggie Neal's work at Stanford, and really focused on fairness and fairness negotiation, fairness, whatnot. But people who feel personally powerful expect fair treatment. And if they don't get fair treatment, for example, compensation, et cetera, they are much more quick to speak out, to accept, they will not accept unfair offers. So I had a colleague in passing once, and she was a single mother. This was during COVID. And she got it, it's kind of the whole job market was in flux. There was a lot of unknowns at the beginning of COVID back in 2020, right? And she got a job offer, and it was considerably below market value, considerably. And I was like, this is, they're insulting you. They're taking advantage of you in this fear and whatnot in this situation. And they really want you, obviously. You need to push back, right? And this is what Sheryl Sandberg will say and all these things. But she was so afraid, which is a state of disempowerment, that she just accepted the offer without even saying anything. And and as a result, she's having to struggle more with a lower salary, feeding her family. Now, what the research says is, if you demand fair treatment, meaning if she had actually gone back and said, look, here's the market value, here's what I expect, we really need to reach this number, regardless of whether, the outcome, she probably would have gotten a better outcome, of course. But, regardless of that, just by pushing back in pursuit of fairness, she would have been seen as more powerful, which would have made her seem more valuable, which would have then justified them giving her more money. But by actually accepting the lower offer, she communicated that she herself did not have a lot of power and was therefore not as valuable to the organization.
And so it's, as you describe it, and this gets to Laura Putnam's comment in the chat a bit, this gets to, it's either a virtuous cycle up, that that you add value, and so you express a desire for greater value, and then you're seen as somebody who brings greater value, and so you end up bringing greater value, and it cycles up. Or you're willing to, and I think in chapter 8 you talk about losing your voice or remaining silent. You choose not to articulate what you need in that moment, which then has you be perceived as someone who is lower power, and then because you're perceived that way, that becomes the reality, and so you cycle into lower and lower power in a situation. And so that very early choice can signal and guide a direction upwards or downwards within many organizations.
Exactly. And here's the thing is, and this is so paradoxically, your overgiving becomes the marker which signals that you don't have much to give. Isn't that odd? And the more you give without demanding fair compensation, the more you're actually perceived as having less to give. Whereas when you give less, sometimes you're perceived as having more to give, because that value, the personal power which you exude is itself an indicator of your value, right? We don't need to, you get Bill Gates on your team for a startup. Bill Gates has to do nothing for your startup, but everybody knows this person is going to add tremendous value. Right? It's that kind of aura. that people have. And I'm choosing Bill Gates. Bill Gates has all this money and stuff. But Nelson Mandela, when he stepped out of jail the first day, he's got nothing, right? Except this social credibility, this aura of himself. Something I think that's very important. And something else I think that's super important. Okay, so this is all psychological, meaning the part of our brain that activates when we're in our personal power is called the behavioral approach system, and it's associated with reward, with taking risk, with greater confidence. And there's another one, behavioral inhibition system, which is that kind of makes us freeze, right? You all have that experience where you're in a moment like, am I going to do this? Are we going to do this or not? And if you do it, that's the behavioral approach system. And if you're like, no, I'm not going to jump off the cliff into the water or something, that's the behavioral inhibition system. And these get trained. And so if you're used to being in the behavioral inhibition system, if you're used to the psychology of not taking risks, then it will feel comfortable not to take a risk, and it'll feel awkward to take a risk. And here's the thing even more, like, for example, you're not going to ask for more money because you're afraid they might not like you anymore. And then they might fire you, right? Whatever your brain does. But if you were actually to ask money, you would be stepping into your power, and you cannot predict how people will respond to you if you're used to them responding to you when you're not in your power. Does that make sense?
Because you're stepping into the unknown. You're
Yes.
stepping into that which is unfamiliar to you, and it may in the moment not pay off, but you're exercising that muscle that has been dormant, and you're learning how to express and ask for what you need.
Yeah, if you're used to being disempowered, your prediction about the environment will be the environment will respond to you as if you're disempowered, as if you normally don't have power. And so, when you don't have power, they don't really respond to you very well. But if you step out into your power, suddenly the environment's going to respond to you very differently than it's done before. And so you cannot predict how it's going to respond to you. And generally what the research suggests is it's going to respond to you, maybe not immediately positively, but in the medium term, it will be much more positive. I'll give you an example. They did this study, and I talk about it on workplace courage in the second chapter. And they found that there were situations where, and in the military, right, where discipline and role is very strict. And these people would, when they saw their commanding officer doing something wrong, they would actually speak up about it. And duty compelled them, even though they were the subordinate. And what happened repeatedly in this research was that, initially, of course, the commanding officer is really upset. And then a few months down the line, when this whole thing has been evaluated, that person gets a promotion. Because in the moment, of course, people are a little upset that you're suddenly stepping in and making your voice heard. But afterwards, everybody's like, that person was amazing. And that's when you get rewarded.
Excellent. And I wanted to be able to move from, I know there's some tips and some other strategies in the book, but I wanted to move from the science to the stories.
Mm-hmm.
As you weave them together beautifully. And which story I think is my favorite in the book from the epilogue, but I'll let you choose. Is there a story you prefer, you think really captures this concept of power that can illustrate beyond the science you've already quoted for us?
There's many years ago, this is we at a preschool, this I don't want to use the word crazy, but I can't think of a better word at the moment, basically went into the school and started threatening the teachers. So, and this is what's sad is this is not uncommon right now in the United States. I mean, it's uncommon, but it's not like crazy rare. And that we have these threats to our society. People walk in, right, going postal. I mean, I feel awful just even thinking about that. And this really happened, okay? And this happened to my mom. So this kind of story is quite personal. She's a preschool teacher. She's a preschool teacher back then. And she's sitting there putting these preschool children down to naps, right? And she hears a scream and then a door slam. And then she hears another scream, slam, door, right? And then, boom, the door burst open in her classroom. And there's this guy there he's like twice her height. He's like 6'6" or 6'5", I don't remember. Huge, bulking guy. And he looks at her, like, kind of, and he's something wrong with him. And he's like, help me or I'm going to kill you. Like, can you imagine facing that, right?
I can't.
And by the way, that had happened to 2 other teachers right before it came into this room. And so those 2 slams, those 2 other doors she heard, were the teachers running out of the school, leaving all the preschoolers alone. So now here's my mom in the school. There's like 3 rooms of children, and she's the only adult. And these are preschoolers. Okay. So it's tall, right? And he starts moving towards her very aggressively. And so she just looks at him. And he, for whatever reason, whatever unconscious things were happening or subconscious, he stops about 5 feet away from her. And she'll tell you, like, I could just feel that there was like a heat aura coming off of me. That's how she describes it. And then she's like, she's like, what do you need? And because he said, help me. And he's like, the police, they're after me. And just then she just suddenly registers that there's like police sirens going on outside the school all over the place. And she could see kind of out the window that the school is surrounded. And so this guy had a parent, so anyway, she's like, okay, tell me what I can do. And just then, like the back door bursts open and these 2 police officers come in, and she sees this man start looking at the children, and she's like, this is not good, right? Because who knows what this guy could do. And so she says, hold on. She reaches out and she grabs his arm. And she says, or I think she takes his hand, actually. She says, I will help you. And the man just calms down. And she looks at the police officers and she's like, police officers, are you going to hurt him? And I'm not giving you the full details of stories, but
actually the line that I love from the book is, you're not going to hurt him, are you?
Yeah, you're not going to hurt him, are you? She says to the police officers. So she's like in full control of the situation right now. She's telling the police officers, and they're like, no. And then she just calmly walks him over to the police and hands him off, and he follows along docilely, this guy. So anyway, it's afterwards, everybody's like, what just happened? And the 2 teachers come back and everything, and they get reprimanded by the director of the school later for leaving the children. But the police officers are like, anyway, this guy apparently had broken away from a mental institution nearby and had gotten into the school. And so I really demonstrate this as a sign of power, because of personal power, because here's a woman who stood in her power, right? When she was faced with a threat, she operated on very courageously. What does that mean? She took responsibility over the situation, right? She's like, this is my role, supporting and protecting these children. So there's the value add to the group. And then notice she even added value to the guy. Like, she grabbed his hand and said, I'll help you. So there's this service element. And she's got the wider picture too, which I talk about in the book, and then the control of the situation with the police. So it's just, when people act courageously, like, right? Why would a crazy, again, I'm using that word, but don't mean to, but why would that man respond to a woman half his size when he's, in this situation? And the reason is because this woman was in her power, and that exuded so many signals that he was like, wow, I'm going to listen to her. Right. And then she controlled the situation. She wouldn't say she was courageous or any of these. I'm putting these words in her mouth. Yeah. She would just say, I recognize my responsibility, and what I needed to do in that situation. I could feel it, like a vibration in my soul.
And the way that it beautifully models the 3 triads, certainly courage, certainly adding value, and speaking in a way that was not emotional, that didn't ramp up the situation or accelerate, which I see as a parent, that I make that mistake when my son is dysregulated. If I respond in a dysregulated way, I just make it worse. But the calm and the self-assertion that she did, and she did not have the physical power in the situation. She did not have the authority of a badge or a gun in the situation.
Right.
And in fact, what I didn't know until I read it in the book is she was there as a substitute that day. Like, she was just called and, can you help out? We need you here. So she didn't even have the authority that a director or a full-time teacher might. And yet she was, on that day, the most powerful person in that school.
Because authority is not rank we think it is, but that's not really the source of our psychological power. We make this stuff up. We make up rank and all these corporate titles and stuff, but human psychology, we respond to at the psychological level. And I want to say this. My mom is, of course, very special to me, but she's not unique. Every single person here, everybody who's listening to us right now, has exactly the same power. And that's why I wrote this book, is because I think we don't recognize it or we don't know how to access it. And that's what this is about.
That's great. I love that. And I want to move to the process of writing the book, but I just want to invite viewers. We're right at the 1.5 hour mark. We're going to go another 15, 20 minutes or so here. We welcome questions in the chat, and we will do our best to address them. So, and we're loving the comments in the chat, but there's a lot of them. So if there's a specific question, pose it, and I will layer it in later in the conversation with Chris. But Chris, I just have to ask off the top, how did you pull this off? Like, you wrote this book while interviewing for the job at Tulane, wrapping up the work that you were doing at Rice, having a consulting practice. Like, you are a busy person, and this is not a simple feat. This isn't just a collection of blogs and thoughts and insights. Like, there's a lot of research here. How did you pull it off? What was that process like? We've got lots of people in the room who are writers or want to be writers. And then, is there anything about the process that you can let us know, kind of, behind the actor's curtain sort of thing?
I wanted to say two things. Number one is personal. They found that the higher you go up the hierarchy, the less stress you have. So isn't that interesting that the more responsibilities we get as we go up the hierarchy, the actually less stress we have? And then they did some research, and this is very new research actually in the last couple of years, that the reason for it is it's actually we access our personal power the higher we go up because the environment starts to support our ability to do that, like taking responsibility in these things. And actually they found that going up the hierarchy was not the reason people got calmer. It was because of their personal power. So personal power is quite literally, scientifically, the way that we overcome stress and burnout. That's what the current research shows. And I love that, by the way. You guys, if you're suffering with stress, this is how you can overcome it. But why do I say that with the writing? It's because I think a lot of us, when we think about our work, we see it as a form of, we see it as our self-worth. And when we evaluate something as our self-worth, ultimately you can see how that's approval seeking, even if it's our own approval seeking. And what often is our own approval seeking is something that kids don't have that. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds don't have this kind of self-awareness, self-consciousness. It's ingrained from our environment. At some point we felt unworthy, and so we needed to prove ourselves and be worthy, right? It's getting very into psychology now. But so if you are running your career or writing a book with the intent that we want to be liked or we want to be loved, and I certainly sometimes feel that, I can't not help it. We live in a society that really accentuates external reward. It's disempowering. The reason I was able to write this book and not go crazy and burn out, even though there were moments where I was a lot of stress, was because it came from a place of self-expression. And after my second book, I did burn out. And then I went to India and spent 2 years doing meditation and yoga and all this stuff, right? That's what you do when you burn out. And I was like, I'm never writing a book again. I'm never writing a book again. And then a few years later, I'm sitting on the couch in my place in Houston when I was working at Rice University. And I just knew I had to write this book. I just knew that this was important. And steady calmness, and when it came from there, I was like, this is self-expression. And I started writing it. And of course, at first it was really interesting and I was very curious to understand how all the research was going to come together. I really had no idea myself. I just had stacks of research, like hundreds of research papers. But as I wove it together, it was very, very interesting. And of course, then there are times you're like, well, I hope people like it. I mean, it's just like being human, right? And in those times, that's when the stress starts to get up. I hope people like it. I hope people, and I'm like, nope, go meditate. Yeah. Remember where this is coming from.
Yeah. I was speaking with another author a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the double-edged sword of social media and the speed at which you get feedback on what you've done.
Yeah.
And you and I both publish newsletters. I pay attention. My assistant, Jackie, who's on the call, you're like, how many launches, how many likes, how many shares, how many comments, and you feed on that. And this friend of mine said, I really wish I could go back to the point in time where you publish the book and you send it out, and maybe 3 months or 6 months later you hear about it, rather than 3 minutes after you have just finished something. And that being able to write for the service of the community. And I loved how you said an expression, an example of self-expression is a very different place than I've got to hit the bestseller list. I've got to have, this many retweets about it. I really like that in terms of your process.
I know you're going. Can I interrupt you?
Anytime.
There's a comment like, well, what about imposter syndrome? It reminds me of this story between Wayne Dyer and what was this person who started that publishing company? Lisa, no. She's a very famous self-help author, and she wrote a book. I'm blanking, but anyway, if I said her name, you would all know it. She's the one who quoted, like, we're not afraid of our lack of power. We're actually afraid of our power. She has
Marianne Williamson.
Was it Marianne? No. Okay, then it was somebody. Anyway,
keep going.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Go for the story, Chris.
And so Wayne Dyer has published whatever bestseller he published, right? He's on the top of the bestseller list, like, for like 30 weeks in a row. And then one day he's having this call, and if you've seen this video, talk about it. Louise Hay, that's right. Thank you, Michelle. Louise Hay. And it's on this call with Louise, and he's like, am I on the bestseller list? This is not before internet. And she's like, no, you're not on the bestseller list. And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, your book is on the bestseller list. You see?
I love that. So, connect the dots back to the imposter syndrome.
Yeah, thank you.
Where the question came from.
One of the things that makes us, when we don't take responsibility for what happens, that's disempowerment. So blame is one of the, I call it the 4 horsemen of disempowerment, actually, blame. We blame our failures on others, and you will be much more powerful if you blame your failures on yourself, not as a way of judging yourself, but as taking responsibility, because then you signal to yourself you're in control, right? And so it's not about being right or wrong. I say this so many times in the book. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about where you put your anchor, for example, or taking responsibility or not. And by the way, people will respect you more if you take responsibility for failure than if you blame failure. Cool research. But what happens in imposter syndrome is almost the same thing, except we blame our successes on others or on something external to ourselves. So what you can do is, there's a few things you can do. But one of the research, they found that if you're just stand in a power pose, right? So everybody knows power pose, work from Amy Cuddy and whatnot in the TED Talk. But power posing puts us can access physiological pathways to our power. Another thing that helps, and so they did this research, and they found that if you tap into your power 20 minutes before an interview, doing nothing else, you're almost twice as likely to get the job. Can you imagine that? Doing one thing has nothing to do with the interview itself, not interview skills, not resume, tapping into your personal power before you go into an interview, you're twice as likely to get the job. Any high situation. Now think about any situation, it probably works. Well, what did they do in this case to tap into their power? 20 minutes before the interview, they had people sit down. Well, there are a few things, but I'm gonna give you my favorite. They had people sit down and pick the top 3 or 4 values from a list of values that resonated with them, right? Picking values. And then of those top 3 or 4, pick your favorite value. I encourage you to, by the way, write this down, because this works and this will forever be good for you. And then spend 4 to 5 minutes writing why this value is important in your life. So you might have a list and you might be like freedom or family, but it's really choosing the most important value and then writing about 4 or 5 minutes. The writing of that value is, let's call it an emotional power pose, in that it connects you to yourself. So there's an internal alignment as opposed to focusing externally on trying to make a good impression. Doing nothing else but writing for those 4 minutes about your top value in your life, even if it has nothing to do with your work. You go into that interview, you're almost twice as likely to get the job, because you just show up completely differently, right? If you're writing about your family for 5 minutes, you're in a totally different mindset than if you're worried about what they're going to think of you. And so if you're worried about imposter syndrome, there's 2 things you can do. Number 1 is to take responsibility more often for the things that are happening in your life, good and bad. And number 2 is to connect to your values. And doing this, you will begin to realize, oh, actually everything is within my control, because it's both ways it works.
I love the concept of the emotional power pose. If you haven't trademarked that, I want to, Jackie, before he gets offline, if you can go trademark that for us. No, that's just because I like the physical power pose, and I teach it, even though there's questions around some of the science, because it works for me. But I love the sense of emotional power pose, and it's on page 181, right at the end of chapter 8 on Speak Up. Chris gives us those example words as prompts.
Every single chapter has a science-backed technique to tap you into your power. Like, I just stole everything from psychology. It's all from the academia.
We're going to run out of time quickly here. Chris and I watched a LinkedIn Live yesterday with another guest, and it was only 30 minutes. We're like, oh my gosh, that's going to go so fast. 45 minutes has gone really fast. I want to put one more pitch out there to questions, particularly quick questions that listeners want to pose to us. And also want to acknowledge, Chris, I'm happy to answer questions you have. Let's first go to this from Jacqueline. Would you say establishing and growing your power from a professional standpoint is different from your personal life, or is it related to the other?
It's literally the same, because it's a belief about yourself. And I really start to get into that later towards the book. It's obviously a book written for business, but at the end, I'm like, look, guys, this is universal. And I take situations of people dealing with relationship issues and whatnot. You can, how we lose our power. Sometimes in a relationship, when we feel that we start to feel insecure in the relationship. Now, by the way, intimacy has its own rules, right? But sometimes when we're feeling insecure, we start to give up our power to our partner. And funny how that doesn't really work, right? And they start to maybe even like us less. And this is kind of the spiral that ends relationships sometimes, is out of fear, we give up our power, and out of giving up our power, become less attractive. Well, what is our power? Well, it's obviously not dominance and all this alpha nonsense. It's just having boundaries, really being true to our own values, right? And that's where that mutual respect comes in, that allows for healthy relationships to thrive. Another question I see too is, did the research show any differences between genders? And no, that's what's super fascinating, that as a rule, almost all research in psychology checks for gender differences, and personal power has none. Now, what's really fascinating is there was one, and I give this example in my research, is that this is actually Jeff Pfeffer's work, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is that they found that when people start to feel insecure, so when they start to feel out of their power, men, but not women, are more likely to act manipulative in order to try to experience a sense of control over their environment.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that is some of the work that he has done. So, Chris, what's missing in the book? You included a lot in the 200 pages of the book, but I know there's some research that's come out since then, and there's probably some stuff on the cutting room floor. Anything you can let us know about that didn't make the book, but you think our listeners would be happy to hear about?
I love the research. I didn't go into detail about how personal power really does protect us from burnout and reduce our stress. I mentioned it as benefits, but the research is so beautiful there, how it does that. And then I was just looking at this research paper. It's funny you mentioned that. I got it right here, but it's called Sound of Power, Conveying and Detecting Hierarchical Rank Through Voice. By the way, this is kind of the nonsense I've been reading for the last 3 years, right? If that sounds like super academic. But what's fascinating about it is it says that, how we normally associate deeper voice with power. Yes, I'm powerful. James Earl Jones. And that's actually true for dominance. People who are more physically dominant and who have more testosterone, they do speak more deeply. However, in terms of hierarchy and rank and perceptions of power, a little higher tone is actually considered more powerful. Isn't that crazy? So
Yeah.
for you guys who are like, I'm concerned that my voice is too high, I need to talk lower, that's just not true. And I'll give you examples. Bill Gates, not a deep voice person. Steve Jobs, the president-elect. Like, these people, they talk not the deepest pitch. So if you're concerned about your voice, I say don't worry about it. You just do the things that put you in your power, and your voice will automatically resonate with, what people will find powerful.
And I don't think what I have often taught is to have gravitas, go low and go slow. If I want something to be more powerful, have more weight, drop into my lower register, slow down a bit. And yet that's a tactic. It may work, it may not work in different situations. What I like about your book, Chris, is that you say in here that you've got to have integrity inside it. Like, you've got to be doing good work. You've got to be adding value. You've got to be contributing. And that is going to be your greatest source of power in a situation.
It's so wonderful you say that, because we've talked so much about how power can really help us show up strong. What I love most is that power helps us feel strong. It helps us feel confident. And we use these words, confidence in things and power and stuff, kind of freely in our society, but these are very fluffy. What does it mean to be confident? It means to believe in yourself. Okay, what does it mean to believe in yourself? And you know what it means? I'll tell you right now. It means take responsibility for the things that are happening around you. It means tuning into yourself rather than tuning outside to the environment to see what you think is the right choice in a situation. And it means taking action. One thing we haven't talked about at all today, but one of the foundations of power is action.
I appreciate that. And I can't emphasize enough the value of Chris's book, The Science of Personal Power, published by Wiley last week. We've talked a little bit about his other books. I ran to my bookshelf. Well, Magnetic I had very close by, was right next to me. But the first book that I was ever a part of with Chris, The Startup Pitch, A Proven Formula to Win Funding. Chris, I still use your 4-point model. I wish it was the baseball diamond. I love the way you created it at one point, but then you did it as 4 columns. But is there a problem? Is there a solution? Are there people willing to pay for that solution? And I only score if I have a business model that captures the money from those people who want the solution to that problem. Yeah. All of your work has added to our field, has been a contribution, not just to the discipline of communication, where you and I have both have our heart, but in entrepreneurship, in leadership, in business, and in a number of other fields. The work that you've done, the research that you have synthesized, absolutely is making a contribution.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you have the last word in just a moment. I will tell our viewers, our producers are dropping our websites in the chat. Feel free to check out jdschramm.com or speakvalue.com, which is Chris's website. You can see more about our books, the work that we do. We both have newsletters. I assume you can subscribe to your newsletter. If people go to speakvalue.com, they can get on my newsletter list. We would love to keep the conversation going, but we're wrapping up at the end of our hour. Chris, what's what's the final thought you want to leave everybody with who are watching us live and who watch the video later? What's the last word? I'll let you have it.
Well, I'm going to let you guys, I will be leading a course on personal power in January. And so if you want to stay tuned to that, you can just friend me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn, go to the resources page on my website, and I'll keep you updated on that course and the details. The most important thing, I think, to recognize is that you have power in this life. And there are some very simple things you can do to tap this power and tap into your power. And when you do, the world around you will change. And that's what power is. When we're disempowered, we're not having an impact on our environment. And we feel that on the inside. But it's not about us. It's not about who you are. Personality has almost no correlation to personal power. It's about whether you've accessed your power or not. And when you access your power, you will find that the world around you begins to change as a result of your presence in it. So I just want to say that is available to everyone. You can always get more and more power, just like mastery. It's a place you're reaching. You're always getting closer and closer.
Excellent, excellent, Chris. Thank you for your time today. To everybody who's viewing this or watching the recording later, thank you for your interest in the topic, your commitment to it. We were delighted to provide this afternoon on LinkedIn Live, and keep in touch with both me and Chris. We will have interesting things, his course, and who knows what's coming out from me in the new year. Thanks so much, everybody. And with that, let's call it a wrap.
Thank you.